Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank Josh for inviting me to talk today. Let me go ahead and pause for just 1 second. I got to tell my staff to turn their volume down just a little out there. So you're not getting that back echo in here. Sounds like we got it under control now. So again, my name's Larry Hudson. I am the manager at the Okanogan County Noxious Weed Control Board. My talk is going to be a little bit different than what we saw earlier today. Most of our talks earlier were from that state level, and this is going to be more from a local level. And I'll be talking about some weeds that we have here in Okanogan County. So Washington State Law, RCW 1710, is what governs all of us county weed boards and directs what we do as far as ensuring that landowners are controlling weeds on their property that are listed on the Washington State Noxious Weed List. My talk today is going to focus on early detection and rapid response noxious weeds that have been located here in Okanogan County. And no, it's not because I'm a narcissist and really want to promote Okanogan County. It's just because those are the weeds that I know best. So first up, some of you may be going, well, why are weeds a problem? So weeds can create fire hazards along our railroads, right-of-ways, our power substations, and other places where sparks can be an issue. Some of them can present allergy issues for folks or be toxic to people or livestock. And some of them, all it takes is just a contact with your skin to cause a problem. Whereas some of the other ones, ingesting them will cause those issues. Weeds can also reduce forage for our native wildlife as well as our domestic livestock. They also compete with our desirable crops, reduce the aesthetic value of our landscape. They can be issues along our roadways, creating sight hazards, not being able to see around a corner, that sort of thing. And they can harbor diseases, rodents, and insect pests. So what are noxious weeds? Noxious weeds are non-native plants introduced through human actions, and because of their aggressive growth and lack of natural enemies, these species can be highly destructive, competitive, or difficult to control. So I put together a little slide here to kind of demonstrate the effects of what happens once a weed gets started and happens over time. So currently, our western wildlands are being lost at a rate of about 4,600 acres per day to invasive plants. And to demonstrate that, we will show, if you look down in the very bottom of your screen in the center there where the arrow points, this is a start of a leafy spurge infestation. So that would be year 1. By year 2, it's still pretty small, easy to contain at this point. Year 3, we're really starting to move throughout that foreground. By year 5, we're starting to see new patches starting further off into our landscape there. Year 7, it's starting to get well established throughout all of that foreground. There's year 10. By year 25, we've moved clear across the valley. Year 35, pretty much that whole valley is infested. And by year 50, we're starting to move off into the foothills of the mountains in the background. So that's why we want to try to stop these things before they get going and not let it become this. So my talk today is going to be on Class A noxious weeds that are found in Okanogan County. These species are mandatory eradication plants. So what do I mean by that? So according to WAC 16750, Class A noxious weeds are those noxious weeds not native to the state that are of limited distribution or are unrecorded in the state and that pose a serious threat to the state. So for agricultural purposes, wildlife, habitat, all those things that I mentioned earlier. RCW 1710-140 requires that all landowners eradicate any Class A noxious weed infestations on their property. And what do I mean by eradicate? That means to eliminate a noxious weed within an area of infestation. So this means that we have a pretty good problem up here in Okanogan County because we have a bunch of Class A noxious weeds. Lucky us. So the first weed I want to look at is Mediterranean sage. Mediterranean sage was first recorded in Okanogan County in 2020. It's a coarse biennial or short-lived perennial with a stout taproot. Mediterranean sage typically grows from up to 3 feet tall. And one big distinguishing characteristic with this plant, it is covered with very thick woolly hairs, making it sometimes confused with common mullein. But the leaf structure is much different than common mullein. So the leaves are 4 to 12 inches long and have petioles. So this plant prefers well-drained soil and inhabits drained riparian areas and dry pastures. Here in Okanogan County, we have found it growing in our shrub steppe habitat in some fairly sandy soil. So Mediterranean sage reproduces strictly by seed, and it acts kind of like a tumbleweed to spread those seeds around. So the stalk of those plants will break off in the fall and roll along, dispersing their seeds with the wind as they go. They're actually quite a heavy stalk too when they start to tumbling like that. One of our local landowners was out with his tractor and had one of these plants tumble along, hit the tractor in the windshield and blew the windshield off his tractor. So some pretty good weight to them. Little closer look at what you're looking at for Mediterranean sage. Top left would be those rosette stages towards the beginning of the year. Next to the right would be as that plant starts to bolt. Further over to the right up top is a close-up look at the blooms on the plant. And then further on to the right would be the actual seed pod of those plants. In the lower left corner, you can see there is quite a bit of difference between.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Nathan Roueche with Washington State Department of Agriculture Pest Program. Among a couple other things, I coordinate the terrestrial mollusk survey. I'm here to talk about Vineyard Snail in Washington, a cheesy, slow, and slimy threat to regional crop exportation. But I am excited to talk about this one because it doesn't get a ton of, I don't want to say attention, but it's been around for a while. It's pretty limited, and I'm excited to get to talk about it with a broader audience across the state. Pardon me while I figure out how to advance this. All right. Quick overview of the structure today. Gonna do a bit of slugs and snails background, and then slugs and snails as pest. Focus in on the target species of the topic, vineyard snail. Move on to a Washington introduction, and then reporting. It's kind of exciting to not be the only person talking about mollusks. It's unusual for me. We had the mussels presentation from Justin earlier, so this is fun to follow up. But mollusks are an extremely ancient group of organisms on the planet. They include clams, oysters, mussels, snails, squid, octopus, etc. And most of this diversity was already in existence during the Cambrian period. So these things have been around for a very long time. Within mollusks, the family Gastropoda are slugs and snails, Gastropoda being Greek for stomach, foot. And they inhabit both marine, freshwater, and uniquely terrestrial environments. We generally think of them being in moist and temperate terrestrial environments, but not always the case, as we will get to here in a couple slides. They all share a few life history traits. They hatch out of eggs. Eggs are generally laid in soil. Everything's general in any type of biology. There's always exceptions to every statement you can make, and they generally need to stay moist. They're also usually not identifiable in the egg form visually. That would need to be done via molecular means. The juveniles come out of the eggs, and they're pretty much tiny egg-sized versions of the adults. When talking about snails and slugs, we generally won't report a minimum size range as we might with insects. They start out as small as you can see them and grow to a maximum size. And then in their adult form, they're frequently only active during optimum conditions, and they can kind of hunker down and live for several years in the environment when conditions aren't good for them, whether it's too hot, drought, dry, whatever. It's kind of a unique response. Also importantly, many species are hermaphroditic, meaning that any two of the same species can encounter each other, mate, and both can leave and lay eggs. The male and female reproductive systems, and sometimes multiple systems within each organism, which is a pretty unique adaptation and a complicated problem for managing invasive populations. Also, unique to snails is the shell. Basically, a snail is just a slug with a shell, or vice versa, which means that snails can pull up into that shell and estivate for a long period of time. In fact, it was a museum specimen that had been mounted on a card emerged as actually being a live snail, not just a dead shell, 5 years after it was collected. Kind of an extreme example, but it just shows how effectively they can hunker down and remain dormant, almost akin to seeds, more like plants than animals in some ways. Generally, terrestrial mollusks are agricultural pests, from your basic garden pests being generalist herbivores, just chomping down anything they can get their hands on, leaving their mucus trails on fruits and vegetables. They can foul agricultural equipment during harvest in high densities, particularly in grains. And then once harvested, those slow crushed bodies can get into granaries and crop storage and promote fouling and rotting of stored goods. We don't think about it as much, but they also have impacts on livestock. Livestock forage that's heavily coated in mucus is often not palatable to livestock, and they will turn away from forage occasionally in areas with high terrestrial mollusk concentrations, particularly if they are brought into either like hay bales or into silage containers that rot will be promoted by their little crushed moist bodies in there, and that will lead to spoilage. And there are also vectors of numerous diseases and parasites to livestock, as well as humans. They are known vectors for many human diseases, particularly involving nematodes or trematodes, roundworms. Humans are generally accidental hosts, but these are some pretty nasty diseases. So please, I'm going to emphasize this over and over. We do not handle snails and slugs, even if it's a species or an area not known to have a human health issue associated with them. When we start moving species around, biological invasions result in novel interactions between species, and a lot of human health concerns result from species interacting with one another for the first time and host jumps. Pardon me for a second. Excuse me. So snails and slugs as biological invaders kind of may seem counterintuitive. They're so slow, we hardly see them around, but they are phenomenal hitchhikers. They are incredibly good at sticking to surfaces, particularly vehicles and containers. Also, products such as stone, marble, tile, pipe, etc., things that they will climb up on either to get out of the sun, seeking shade, or seeking calcium for shell development. And once attached to something, they can go dormant and stick and be incredibly difficult to remove and survive salt exposure, heat exposure. That hitchhiking ability, they're really second to none amongst animals in that regard. And then, as I mentioned earlier, that hermaphroditic reproduction, it really increases the odds of a population establishing and spreading in a new area if every individual introduced is reproductively compatible. And then they're also really cryptic and seasonal. They often aren't around. Even when around, they're often not noticed, whether it's because they're dormant, burrowed into the soil, whether they're small and camouflaged, or often nocturnal. These are all traits that make them everywhere but seldom noticed. And in that they can move across the landscape or between continents as fast as any of our goods. While we think of them as a slow organism, their rate of spread is actually incredibly fast as an invader. The majority of slugs and snails you're likely to encounter in urban, suburban, human-developed landscapes in Washington are going to be non-native introduced species. They're widespread. We tend to not think of these as invasive, as they're not having an economic impact or an ecological impact, although they may have initially. These are species that have been around for a long time and are not managed in the Northwest. Some familiar ones would be the leopard slug, the Aryan slug, which can either be in this kind of reddish brown morph or a black morph, the common garden snail, and then particularly in Western Washington, the brown-lipped snail. Include the wrinkled dune snail in here. It's very small. It's the one at the bottom. Be pretty tough to ID. It is a more recent arrival, currently not a regulatory pest, although I would be supportive of anyone encountering this to report it. It is on the move and does seem to be moving along the rail lines out of the ports in Western Washington. Again, most of the ones you're going to encounter are going to be, like, if they're familiar, they're likely a long established non-native species. Most of our native species are actually pretty sensitive and are more likely to be encountered in a natural, unimpacted environment. So moving on to the vineyard snail, our topic species here. Scientific name, Cernuella virgata. It has a number of common names. We're going to go with vineyard snail for this talk. Its native range is the Mediterranean basin, being southern Europe and northern Africa. This region is hot and dry for much of the year. And this is a common snail of gardens, vineyards, fields, within this native range. It's generally a nuisance pest, much as our garden slugs would be in the Northwest, but not considered like a major agricultural issue within its native range, as is so common with most invasive species. They have a 1 to 2 year lifespan generally, with mating occurring in the late summer and fall when that dry season is generally broken by a precipitation event. During the winter, they go into a dormancy, either sheltered in the soil or in vegetation. And then that reproduction would be in the late summer, fall precipitation events with juveniles noticeable on the landscape in early spring. One of their behaviors that they're most known for is the summer estivation habit they have, where in their range and the habitat they occupy within the range, the ground gets incredibly hot in the summer, and so they climb and cluster. This is a trait common to other snails that inhabit this hot xeric habitat type, kind of unusual for what we think of as a snail habitat in our environment. But this clustering gets them off the ground, can cool them down 10 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and also they think the clustering helps dissipate heat and protects them from the sun. So generally climbing posts, vegetation, fence lines, which I suspect led to its name as the vineyard snail, probably climbing grapes and trellises in vineyards during the summer. So as biological invaders outside of their native range, in the 1920s, they were known to have established in Australia and started having some impacts. And then in the late 1940s and 50s, they were detected all around Northern and Western Europe and the British Isles. Certainly not guaranteed, but seems at least possible that they were moved in post-World War commerce and possibly with material and people coming back to their home countries from this native range. And they had massive economic impacts to the South Australian wheat industry. The combines and threshing equipment was fouled during harvest as they climb up and form clusters at the top tips of branches. This is very, very much like the head of wheat or barley, and the threshing equipment cannot separate them effectively. So they just get a whole bunch of crushed, broken snail, both heading to granaries, clogging equipment, a real impact to operations. They also were being found in high density in this novel environment in Australia, not just going into grains, but also into peas and pasture grass and really high density falling rain events. And most importantly, economically, when all of this was going on, the Australian wheat exports were refused by foreign markets, close to devastating for Australian wheat production. So fast forward here to 2005, a population of vineyard snail was detected within the port of Tacoma. It was detected by Washington State Department of Agriculture survey pest program staff doing a visual survey for Asian longhorn beetles. They stepped off the road at a pullout and realized that there were small white snails they'd never seen before all over everything. The identification was confirmed with assistance from USDA, and a rapid survey was put in place to figure out how broadly established this species was. Thankfully, it was determined to be fairly local. I don't believe it was more than a half-mile away from this detection site in any direction within the immediate detection area. And all of this initial work and still ongoing work has been a cooperative effort between WSDA, the U.S. Department of Agricultural Animal Plant Health Inspection Services, and the Port of Tacoma. It's been a fantastic team effort to be a part of. So prior to response, we need to assess the threats. Thermal abrugata, vineyard snails, a generalist threat to most crops in the state, could potentially impact everything being a generalist herbivore, particularly with their tendency to form in high densities in novel environments. And they are a specific threat to Washington's grain industry due to a number of reasons. The previously described equipment fouling during harvest, stored grain contamination, and the impacts to a globally significant regional grain export system. As Justin mentioned earlier, the Columbia Snake intermodal system is one of the preeminent wheat export pathways in the world. And while the Port of Tacoma may be far from the grain growing region, this pathway of getting our grain to the world's market could also serve as a very likely pathway of getting the world's snails to our grain growing region, in that they can still be attached as that transport equipment moves back up that intermodal system to the grain producing regions. So definitely a threat, far from the resource where it is known to be now, but something we really need to take seriously. So we're coming up on 20 years of dealing with this. So a quick rundown of what's been done, and then I'll follow this up with what we're doing now. Following that initial introduction, the population was found to be limited to the immediate area, so the eradication seemed feasible. There was vegetation removal from all known infected parcels. Vegetation was not moved out of that area. It was piled and burned on site. Equipment was sterilized, anything that was involved in the area. Snail bait applications were made throughout the area around known infested parcels. And the population was reduced to a single parcel. We've got it down to a couple acres at the midpoint here, where we switched to steam treatments of the soil. After, as you can see in this lower picture, this was the same site that was that forested parcel at the initial detection. This picture is just a couple years ago. All vegetation has been removed aside from what grows back following reseeding after the burning. And we've had been going through and burning the area with good luck, not burning, steam treating the area under tarps, pumping steam in and raising the surface temperature to kill off eggs, juveniles, and any adults that may be in the soil during the summer dormancy period. And this was really effective. Up to 2022, we were seeing good results. The detected populations were in a very steady decline, and we're down to just a few individual snails within a very small area in 2022. Late summer in 2023, we were present for a large emergence event from estivation. A large number of snails broke estivation following an early AM hot thunderstorm in Tacoma. None were found outside of the area that we knew they were present, but what was concerning was how many were found in an area where we had only found a dozen or so for the few previous years. These pink flags represent at least one, if not a cluster of snails that were detected after this thunderstorm, and in an area that had been baited and steam treated in the approximate area recently. So this was concerning. there were some long faces that morning. It was great to have been there and documented it, but it wasn't what we were expecting to find. Like I said, it was good to know. Information is always useful. For whatever reason, our management strategy for this one isolated half acre was not effective, and we needed to switch game plans here. This site is also highly proximal to containers, both being moved in and out of the port and as a container staging area, as well as a side yard for rail cars. So a pretty high continuing possibility for dispersal from the site, even though we're dealing with a low population. Allowed to persist, that's something that's unlikely eventually becomes inevitable given enough time. So we really want to move forward on kind of driving the nail in the coffin on this now small isolated population. So plans for this year and the future, working with the Port of Tacoma and some of their contractors, the site is going to be developed in 2025 through 2026. Figure a couple feet of gravel and some concrete and a building will probably be something they can't get out from under, which will move this project into a new chapter where we are going to have full emphasis on delimitation. It's going to be crucial to monitor both locally and throughout the entire state, particularly along the Columbia Snake intermodal system. So everyone can help with this. This is a tough one for us because we're a pretty limited crew and the time of year is narrow to see these things, but having folks out in the state reporting is really, I feel, going to be the absolute crux of this project moving forward. So folks can pay particular attention to the spring and fall active period for swarming in crops or adjacent vegetation, swarming of these smallish white snails, any warm precipitation events such as the one many of us experienced last night. I call it the snail survey paradox. It's important for us to be in the Port of Tacoma when these conditions happen because we know they're there, but that is also the exact same moment or time of year it is important for us to be everywhere else in the state for maybe an hour or so in the morning when they're active at first light. It makes it really tough to be everywhere at once. So if we can get folks contributing snail detections throughout the state, particularly in the grain growing region or along interstates, rail lines, be immensely appreciated. Also summer estivation, folks working in agriculture or otherwise out in the world. There's not too many snails in the Northwest that are this size and this color that will climb and cluster. I also want to emphasize it's climbing. Sometimes it's climbing and clustering. Sometimes it's climbing or clustering. They will also climb and estivate singly. And they will also cluster on the ground. So oftentimes a lot of these images going to be both behaviors together, but it can also be both of them individually. And while the species is vineyard snail in name and the primary economic threat is to grains, it can persist in a number of other habitats. Roadside ditches, rail yards, industrial areas, things that not that many other species would be likely to persist in. These things seem to thrive. So what to look for prior to reporting? These are dime to penny-sized snails as adults, quite a bit smaller, kind of a unique size range for snails in the Northwest. Things tend to either be much smaller or much bigger. Their color is kind of an off-white to bone color with a brown stripe. Oftentimes there are unstriped individuals that are a little bit less easy to identify, but for the most part, that off-white with the brown stripe is going to be a diagnostic. Also, if you notice, there's no brown lip on the leading edge, the opening of these shells. In fact, very frequently, they're kind of transparent, perhaps, certainly translucent along this leading edge. And that's just as it's continuing to grow. As previously mentioned, I really think this behavior is going to be what catches someone's eye. That's why I kind of keep coming back to it and emphasizing it over and over. This climbing and or clustering in the summer is going to be a good diagnostic for someone to notice something odd in the anywhere really, whether it's in your yard or in a field, any type of setting. There's not a lot around that does this. The exact ID cannot be confirmed from a photo, but I assure you, if you submit a photo that looks like any of these, someone will be coming to your location rapidly to assess this. We're very concerned about this one getting out of the area under eradication. As with anything, there are any of our species we ask folks to look for, there are ones that are frequently submitted that are not our target, which is fine. I certainly don't want someone to not report something, but just to emphasize, the brown-lipped garden snail, also known as the grove snail, is a very common snail in Western Washington. At least it is not yet documented in Eastern Washington, but very common through Puget Sound, Southwest Washington. It also likes to climb. I've never seen them cluster, but they particularly like salmonberry and blackberry on the side of the road. They climb and kind of estivate for the summer as well. And they also have this brown stripe, and they're highly variable. Sometimes they can be almost entirely brown. Sometimes they can have no brown on them at all. Like to emphasize that they are generally what I think of as like a butter color, as opposed to this kind of off-white, bone white of Cernuella rigata. And they also have this leading brown lip along the opening of their shell. That's probably the first thing I look at when we get a hotline submission for Cernuella rigata sighting, is that brown lip. And of course, if you're unsure, submission with a photo is always fine. We're never like upset that we're just getting Cernuella rigata over and over. Excuse me, brown lip snail over and over again. And also, please submit with a photo. I know it's a huge pain with insects. It is super easy with snails and slugs, where this is a good opportunity to get close but not handle and get a in-focus photo. They're not going to get away from you, and we don't need to see the body of the organism for an ID. It's actually the shell is most important, which I guess is another important point. Feel free to submit photos of dead shells. They don't get around without being attached to live snails, and we do use dead shells as a strong indicator of the presence of one of these. So suspicious shells are also a great hint in tracking down where these things could be or are not. This is also approximately the right size variation between this larger brown-lipped snail with the yellow shell and this vineyard snail down in the lower left, about half the size max. Again, snails start the size of their eggs, so there's always a chance for overlap in the smaller stages, but maxed out, this is about the proportion. We have a couple of similar species in the United States that are also harmful invasives that I would encourage you all to report for a number of reasons. One of which is that they're indistinguishable. So we'll have to get our hands on them to figure out whether it's the vineyard snail or these other two, the Mediterranean snail or the eastern heath snail. And these other two are not known to be in Washington and could potentially cause similar impacts to grain industries, although they're not known to and are not currently federally regulated national priority pests. But certainly don't look off one because you think it might be one or the other. We'd love to know about all of them. Thankfully, I'm going towards the end, and you've all seen a lot of information from folks on how to report. Again, highlight the Washington State Invasive Species Council, and then our own WSDA reporting hotlines. With snails and slugs particularly, I'd like to emphasize iNaturalist. Please don't use it for an emergency reporting, but if you're just curious on what something is in your yard, snails and slugs are often woefully underrepresented in various types of field surveys compared to other things such as plants or insects. And iNaturalist is both a great way to document where these things are, both native, non-native, and invasive. And it's also a really great way to learn how to ID as you watch people argue over what they think it is and what they're using. I enjoy popping on here and looking through snail submissions quite a bit. Reemphasized, please submit photos. Dead shells are just as good as live. Live may be best, but a dead shell, very close second. And again, please do not handle these things. I would hate to find out that someone got sick after any information put out there from my survey emphasizing the importance of reporting snails. They're not worth touching. Think I have time here and a little bit to kill. So I mentioned earlier that generally the eggs are not identifiable. This is kind of just a for fun story that I was reminded of as I was digging through snail stuff. In fact, some of the people presenting today were involved in this story. March 2023, the hotline received a report of a channeled apple snail egg mass in a dog park in Seattle. Channeled apple snails, destructive, invasive to Gulf Coast wetlands and aquatic snails, so it seemed pretty suspicious, but these are pictures of their egg masses. And the photo that was submitted, I no longer have, but it was kind of blurry and distant and tough to tell what was going on. A lot of debate happened. I went to the site and started poking around and determined that it was a peep someone had stuck in the blackberries. I know Todd's coming up after me. I believe Todd called that it looked like a peep from the blurry photo. This is probably my favorite hotline submission of all time. And I only bring it up because even if you are as wrong on your ID when you report to us as a peep and an apple snail, it only makes us happy, and we're still going to take it seriously and go look for it. It's not ever like we're going to think someone is no contributions are going to be unwelcome. In fact, if anyone in the audience reported this peep, please reach out to me. I would love to. Thank you for giving me one of my favorite days of work ever. So in conclusion, the vineyard snail is a major threat to Washington's grain industry. Knock on wood, but successful eradication seems near after 20 years of hard work and multiple approaches. There has never been any found outside of this immediate detection site, which has only continued to shrink in extent through the years. But the pathways and the means for long distance dispersal throughout the region are nearby. So this is still a threat and needs to be looked for throughout the state, particularly as we move into this post-eradication delimitation couple of years that we have coming up. Public reporting is going to be crucial, and finding if this species has actually managed to jump the site and is elsewhere, with long distance dispersal being, I think, just as likely as short distance dispersal, unfortunately. And again, please do not handle snails and slugs. They carry bad things. Oftentimes they carry bad things that science and medicine isn't aware of yet, and nobody wants to be the subject of a medical paper. With that, cliffhanger for next time. Not a lot to say here. If you see a snail bigger than your hand, please also report that. I think I've got time for questions. I kind of started in odd times, so I'm not sure if I've ran long or short, but
you're all good. Larry is back with us, so I think we're.
So the next weed I had on my list was meadow clary. It was first found in Okanogan County in 2011. It's another perennial, and it ranges from 1 to 3 feet tall. This plant has a very aromatic scent to it if you break the stems, and the same with the Mediterranean sage. It also has very hairy leaves, maybe not so much as the Mediterranean sage. One important thing to keep in mind with this particular plant is there are a lot of lookalikes out there. So my recommendation is, if you do believe you have some of this meadow clary, that you contact your local weed board to ask for assistance with identification. And I'm going to try to move through my slides quickly here so we get everybody on track, on schedule. So here's a closer look at the meadow clary plant. Down in the lower left corner, we have those young plants that emerge early in the spring, probably in the next 2 to 3 weeks here in our country. It has a square stem. If you'll notice in the upper left, not far left, but kind of second one from the far left. Very beautiful purple flowers when it's blooming. And unlike the Mediterranean sage, which only typically has one stalk, you'll see multiple stalks coming from one root system with this meadow clary. Currently, we have about 6 locations known here in Okanogan County. And again, it's quite possibly spread throughout eastern Washington in various places, but I'm presenting on what we have here in our county. Next up, we've got wild 4 o'clock, also known as mirabilis. So Okanogan County currently has several known infestations of Mirabilis. It's another perennial that reproduces strictly by seed. The flowers are pretty unique, and they're typically tend to open in the afternoon, hence the name of wild 4 o'clock. This plant has heart-shaped leaves that resemble lilac leaves, and it can be confused with sticky geranium because the plants are typically about the same size and the flowers are typically about the same color. We've found Mirabilis in several different habitats here in Okanogan County, ranging from orchards, alfalfa fields, rangeland, along right-of-ways, and in disturbed sites. So the picture on the right there is a large infestation along a right-of-way up in Canada. So what you're looking at with these plants, going up top from left to right, we've got the immature plant. When it first emerges, starts bolting a little higher. We'll get these little buds up on top, and there's the pretty brilliant purple flowers that open in the afternoon. And once those plants have finished blooming, at the far right up top, you'll notice those kind of almost jack-o'-lantern looking little pods up there. That is where the seeds will form. So here's a distribution map for known infestations in Okanogan County. And we get after those sites every year, so try to keep it in check and not go into other counties. Next up, we have Syrian bean caper. So there's currently only one known site of the Syrian bean caper in Okanogan County. We have not found any actively growing plants for the past 6 growing seasons, so we are hopeful that maybe we have it eliminated from our county, but we still keep an eye out for it every summer. So the plant itself, going by pictures, I kind of almost thought maybe a knick-knack berry or something like that, but when you actually see them up close, those leaves are quite a bit larger than what you'd see with like a knick-knack berry. So I'll go into some of those more up-close, subtle differences. So it's got salmon-colored flowers on the plant. You'll notice that the leaves kind of grow in groups of 2, very large leaves, and these are very leathery leaves as well. As the plant matures and starts to produce seed, down in the lower left, you'll see the little bean pods that are forming on there. And here's a distribution map of where we have found this in Okanogan County. So basically right on the U.S.-Canada border. And hopefully we have totally eliminated it at this point. Next up, we've got garlic mustard, which was first identified in Okanogan County in 2012. So interesting story with this plant. It was kind of thought to be strictly more of a Western Washington plant, but lucky us over here in Okanogan County, we found it. And it was purely by dumb luck. I was up visiting with the landowner to look at other plants. And when I got out there, the landowner said, "Hey, what's this?" And I said, "Well, gee, I don't know. I've never seen that before." So did some investigating, and sure enough, another Class A noxious weed for our county, garlic mustard. It is a member of the mustard family, so it does have those 4-petaled flowers, white 4-petaled flowers. This plant does have some beneficial uses because it is edible and actually does have kind of a pleasant garlic flavor to the leaves. Goes pretty good in salad. A closer look at the plant. So top left, that plant is just about ready to set seed. It's got the seed pods forming. To the right would be that first year of growth. what the leaves would look like. They're kind of rounded. As that plant gets to flowering point, that would be the next one to the right. And then those seed pods, just like your other mustards, on the far right up there. And then that lower picture just shows kind of what an infestation would typically look like. It likes more shady areas, so look for them in forested understories. And currently we have only one known site of it here in Okanogan County, and getting pretty close to eradication at this point. Next up, we've got flowering rush. So it was first identified in Okanogan County in 2019 along the shores of Lake Roosevelt. Again, this was another one of those pure dumb luck finds. I was out there fishing and said, wonder what that is. Pulled up the plant and contacted some folks, and sure enough, it was flowering rush, and turned out to be a very large infestation up in Lake Roosevelt. So these plants, you'll see most of the pictures have the nice pretty pink flowers in the umbrella shape up on top. So typically that's not what we see here in Okanogan County. In fact, I've never seen a plant blooming. So we'll go ahead and jump into what it looks like here. So you're going to be looking for, if you pull that plant up on the top left, it's got those bulbils down there that are producing stalks from. Next one to the right shows that it has triangular stems to the plant. Again, we've got the pictures of the flower up there, but I've never seen it that way. Drop down to the lower left. This is a picture of that infestation up on Lake Roosevelt. So it kind of forms a mat similar to milfoil up there. And then to the far right is an actual individual plant underwater up on Lake Roosevelt. And so again, that distribution, currently the only known site in our county, in Okanogan County, is along the shore of Lake Roosevelt. So next up, we've got round leaf bittersweet. So round leaf bittersweet was first found here in Okanogan County in 2019. It was not added to the Washington State Noxious Weed List until 2025. So this year it's a new listing. Fortunately, the site down there has been being controlled since 2019. So hopefully we'll continue to keep it in check and not spreading downriver to other folks. This particular site is right along the Columbia River, so definitely some potential for spread downriver with that water flow. Going into what you're looking at with these plants, this time of the year is a great time of the year to go out and see if you have the round leaf bittersweet. So during the winter time, it typically keeps those red berries on the plant. So if you see a massive vine that can grow to 100 feet long with these red berries, chances are pretty good that you've got the round leaf bittersweet. Next slide to the right on top. So this is a juniper tree actually underneath of all of that vine. So you can't even make out that juniper tree. It's all just the round leaf bittersweet. Closer look at the leaves. Typically a rounded shape to them. One very unique identifier with this one is those berries. If you look at the lower right picture there, they typically have a leathery tuft around the berry that will open up and start to fall off in the spring months. This plant is very easily spread by birds because birds really like the berries on these plants. And so currently there's only one known infestation in Okanogan County. And again, it's down on the Columbia River. So with that, is everybody still paying attention? I know it's getting late in the day. So who noticed the meadow clary in the slide? It's right down here. And with that, any questions?
There was a question right before you were left. What was the first weed that you brought up, the yellow weed growing up throughout the valley and the hills?
So that was leafy spurge. And so that was just kind of a demonstration. That was not an actual infestation pictured over years. That was a put together to show that effect.
Thank you for having me come and speak at this event. As it's been pointed out by a few speakers already, like Jessica and Cassie, it really depends on when we find a new organism in the state or even the country. It really depends on what its regulatory status is on how we respond. And so there's a number of pests that do show up into the state that there is no regulatory response, and so we're kind of stuck living with them. And so the pests that I'm going to talk about today, these new urban pests, are really ones that we're learning to live with, and you may have already ran across these. And pending on timing, I'll go into some more potential pests that could show up into our area, but that we don't have, and I'll try and highlight those. So the pests that I'm going to describe now, you don't necessarily need to report. I sure would be interested in current distributions if you start finding them outside of where we're finding them, so we can deliver some key outreach for that. But the first one I'm going to talk about is the European chafer, and as the name describes, it's native to the western part of the European continent, so England, France, uh, Italy, those areas, and it's just a native scarab beetle that lives in those areas, and the larvae are like a lot of other scarab beetle larvae, C-shaped in size, and we'll kind of go into what they look like. But these are specific on feeding on grasses or cereal crops, and so this is its native range. And again, the adults are, I don't know, they aren't as snazzy looking as the Japanese beetles. They're a little bit drab in color. They can be ranging from a light tan to more this reddish brick red color, and they're only about a half-inch long. They will have significant amount of pubescence, like golden pubescence, on the underside of their body, so they can look a little bit hairy. And the adults are active from mid-June through July. And we'll describe a little bit about what the activity is like. But as these scarab beetles emerge, uh, the females are able to lay up to about 50 eggs. And so once you get a few of these European chafers active in your yard or your lawn, you can see that populations can build up quite rapidly if they decide that your lawn's pretty tasty to eat. Um, but one of the ways that we know that we get European chafer to establish in a new area is from complaints. And some of the early complaints that we'll get is this really interesting behavior, flight behavior that they have when they emerge. And we have this great video of it that we filmed right there in South Seattle of these mating swarms, and I encourage you to go to this YouTube, and I'll put the address in the chat after my talk, um, that you can look up, or you can just Google European chafer and WSU on YouTube, and it'll pop right up. But they do this really unusual behavior. So once they emerge as adults in that late May, early June time, they wait for the sun to go down, and as the sun goes down, the red wavelengths kind of bend over the earth. As those, and that's really what they cue in on. Once they see those red wavelengths light up the sky for their eyeballs, They're looking for a dark silhouette against the night sky. So, so here over here, you see this kind of tree branch up against that night sky. And once they see that, a female will land on that silhouette, and then she'll be amassed on by sometimes 10 to 100 other males looking for successful mating. And so this could be a branch up against the silhouetted sky, or it could be a house eave, or it can be somebody walking their dog in a park. And so when this mating swarm emerges, it can cause a lot of disruption in a neighborhood when things really get going and infested in a neighborhood. So that's one of the key aspects that we first hear about when European chafers show up in a neighborhood. So once they mate and lay eggs, those eggs will hatch into this C-shaped grub that has a very well-developed head capsule. The legs are very well developed, and again, the grub's kind of creamy white and C-shaped, and this is a natural shape. As they get bigger, these can get up to almost 3/4 of an inch long if you stretched it out and measured it. But if you also stretch it out, its guts will explode all over the place because they don't want to get stretched like that. And you'll find these in the first 2 inches of soil of grass, turf plantings, or maybe some other ornamental grass or cereal grass plantings. And so they're going to hang out in that first 2 inches of soil, feed on the fine root hairs as they grow throughout the season. They're going to overwinter in this grub stage. Here in the Northwest, we suspect that they're going to eat all winter long, so they get nice and chunky. And as they develop, they're going to pupate in April and emerge as an adult and do the whole thing over again. So right about now, we're probably seeing them start to form those pupae. And what they do is they kind of make this little earthen compact cell and pupate and hang out there in that first kind of inch of soil just under the turf grass. So again, as they feed, they eat more fine root hairs, and as they get bigger, their appetite grows, and sometimes they'll move into the root crown of the turf grass plant and develop there. They have one generation per year here in the Pacific Northwest, and they create damage like this, and it's going to look a lot like what you saw with Japanese beetle. And so in areas where the larvae are feeding and developing happily, that first kind of warm stretch that we get will likely cause that turf grass to brown up pretty quick. So the grass can't handle the heat and loses its turgor pressure and kind of fries under the hot sun. And so when you see these patches that are infested with European chafer, you just go up there and grab that grass by the hair and just give it a yank, and that patch will just pop right out of the ground because there's no root hairs and roots able to anchor it into the soil. We're going to see some other obvious damage and signs of infestations, like other animals have learned that these are pretty tasty to eat and will rototill your lawn for you and cause damage that way. And this first showed up in British Columbia, Canada, and we took a field trip up there with some USDA and WSDA entomologists to really understand what it looks like as it first moved into our region. And this gentleman that lived across the street from where we're at had European chafer in his front yard for about 5 years now, and every year he had to renovate his lawn and reseed. And boy, after 5 years of damage, and this is back when the Canadians had access to products like chlorpyrifos and Dursban, you'd think that this guy would just probably lay down some rock or plant something else other than grass, because it was a challenge for him to avoid this type of damage. As those larvae establish, again, wildlife's going to really learn that these are tasty, and they get really good at recognizing when lawns are infested and will come and rototill lawn and search for grubs. And so this is probably damage caused by skunk or a raccoon that's going there in the evening and pulling back the turf clumps to get at those kind of tasty grubs. So it's not that hard for them to pull them back and get access to those tasty grubs. And I gotta tell you, a lot of these slides I've been able to use from Peter Isaacson up in British Columbia, who's a private consultant that's done a lot of the early work on what to do about this critter as it's come to the West Coast. So I appreciate Peter's resources. Here's other really indicative damage. This is damage done by crows. Once crows and even sometimes seagulls learn that these are there, they get really good at foraging and they'll go around and pull up little plugs of turf to get to those tasty larvae. And this is really common damage that you're going to see in areas that we have infestations in the state. And I'll kind of show you where those are. Here's a quick video if I can get it to play, showing kind of how crows kind of can really work through a lawn pretty quickly. These were videos that we pulled off the just YouTube, and I think Peter also had these in his presentations, and Chris Looney from WSDA. But you'll see one of these crows, once they find one, they get really excited and do this little dance of victory once they find one and pop it in their mouth. And so again, you'll see these crows very effective at foraging through turf. What's been really interesting to see is we see this behavior show up in crows on the border edges of infestations, to where areas where it doesn't quite occur yet, we'll start seeing crows showing this behavior. And so it wants you to thumbs up it. And then so crows are able to learn and kind of teach their neighbors how to forage for this. But as things establish, we've also seen situations where bear have gotten into yards and started peeling up turf to get to the grubs. And you can imagine a couple black bear in a yard can do quite a bit of damage quite quickly. So what happened here was fascinating. This insect is a pest that's been around probably since the 1940s, and you're going to see a lot of our European pests came here post World War II and around then, if not prior, when initial colonization of the continent happened by Europeans. But so it's been on the east coast of the U.S. for a number of years. In 2001, though, here on the West Coast, master gardener up in British Columbia detected some grubs in their lawn because they were smart. They come to classes like this and learn that we're not supposed to have beetle grubs in turf out here in the West. And so they alerted entomologists up in British Columbia and got the first West Coast detection. So good job, master gardeners. As a result, the WSDA went through and did light traps along Blaine, also hung up Japanese beetle type traps to try to intercept, and didn't catch anything in Whatcom County in those early years. However, going back and looking at some of the Japanese beetle samples that we've been collecting for a long time here in the Pacific Northwest, we did find European chafers detected in these Japanese beetle hanging traps in 2008. And they found this at the major airports within Washington state. So they were able to pick up adult beetles in those major airports, like around SeaTac, and then even the international airport in Spokane. So European chafers may have been using air cargo, air freight, as a way to disperse, much like Japanese beetle moved around the country too. So it wasn't a surprise then in 2016 that we had a master gardener from WSU here in King County detect the first beetles in SeaTac in 2016 that were actually infesting lawns. So what happened there, we tracked over the number of years as those infestations and just the degree of reports around SeaTac those reports grew over the years, and the numbers of beetles in that area grew also. So that area was pretty well considered infested. And as we looked around the SeaTac and Seattle area, we were able to pick up European chafer even as far north as Kirkland by 2019, 2018. And now European chafer is almost all the way up to Everett and down through Tacoma. I don't think it's gotten from Olympia yet from this side, but it's really well established down in the Portland, Oregon area and moving into Vancouver, going into the Columbia River Gorge. We have some positive IDs in the Hood River and Goldendale side of the gorge. We have infestations confirmed in Tri-Cities, and we may have picked up an infestation in Spokane. So keep your eyes peeled. This one is moving around and dispersing out pretty readily through the state. So what to do about it? Like if some of you old timers out there might remember the years that we had the European crane fly come in, and we picked up a lot of bad pesticide habits when that one came in. So I'm a little bit worried about this one. We want to get education out there on proper way to manage it. And so with that, we're really encouraging land managers to consult with licensed professionals and WSU Extension to come up with the right recommendations. And the thresholds that we've developed are really adopted from the East Coast, and they seem to be holding up pretty well. But we're encouraging people to go out and sample healthy turf in areas where you think you have a problem and check out the populations and whether you're getting 5 to 10 grubs per square foot of a pretty thrifty lawn, meaning a lawn that's not really well cared for. That could be enough of a threshold where you might see damage to the actual turf and consider a treatment. In healthy managed turf, that threshold can go up to 20 grubs per square foot. And again, that's pretty significant population. So good turf can tolerate decent populations. The problem is just once vertebrates find out about it, they're probably going to go in and cause more damage. So again, go out there with a spade, shovel, and cut out. We usually do 6x6 and do a few samples in an area to get the average grubs per square foot. And a great way to do that is just to cut a 3-sided square and peel back the turf to count the grubs under it, and then roll that turf back over so you're not causing damage to the turf also. I encourage you to go to our resources like the PNW Insect Management Handbook to look at legal recommended products for preventative treatments. And to be frank with you, I'm pretty reluctant just to get those products out there everywhere because this is a less than ideal situation because these are going to have to be used preventatively. So you need to get the product on the turf after egg laying, but before you see damage. And that's kind of opposite of what we usually teach about integrated pest management. So we treat these as preventative treatments. And again, I can give you a few pesticide classes that are very effective, that also have low mammalian toxicity and even low pollinator toxicity. But this isn't something that we want everybody to go to because we're worried about overuse of pesticides like we saw with European crane fly. There's also curative treatments available, but these are also discouraged because they're pretty harsh on everybody, including European chafer, and none of these products are going to be effective going into October or later. And that's usually when most people are going to start seeing damage and wanting to kill some beetles because they're mad at them and stop the damage. But by then it's too late, and those products are going to be ineffective to grubs. So really what we're trying to do is promote healthy drought tolerant lawns, and I'll describe a little bit what that means specifically on how to manage turf, because it is also a little bit different than what WSU's recommended in the past. But I'm going to, I foresee increased pesticide use as more people want to do something about this pest. And again, that's of concern because of what we saw in previous turf pests, where we tend to create a habit of using these products and overuse them to where they might run off into the stormwater runoff and affect non-targets like salmon and other critters that we don't want to hurt. Um, so we're managing those recommendations pretty closely to the chest, and really hoping that professionals are the ones that go that route. When we've found other ways that might be effective for dealing with European chafer here by frequent watering during that flight period. And so I'll describe what that looks like here. So what we want you to do is just focus on healthy turf if you're going to grow grass. And that means mowing to about 2 to 3 inches tall. You might want to do this at least once a week, maybe even more as grass really grows. So mow frequently and return those clippings back onto the ground. So don't bag it up, and let those clippings mulch back in. Fertilize your lawns well. And here's the general recommendation for fertilization, especially in Western Washington. We tweak this a little bit in Eastern Washington and refer you to master gardeners for those recommendations, because it really depends on where you're at and those soil types. But follow the recommendations on those fertilizer bags, because you don't want to over fertilize and cause other runoff issues too, with things like phosphorus and so forth. We're also looking to encourage people to irrigate, which is opposite of what we usually recommend for managing lawns. We want to normally drive those turf plants to grow really deep roots by watering deeply and infrequently. However, in this case, we found that we can actually deter European chafer in healthy lawns by frequent irrigation. So watering 4 times a week at about 1/4 inch per application, and start turning on the sprinkler from Memorial Day to Labor Day. Again, if we have droughty conditions, we'll adapt these recommendations, but right now that's good practice, good cultural practice to avoid European chafer problems and grasses that you're managing. And we'll have all this summarized in an extension bulletin that's about to come out. There's some other promising things, and these are kind of hit and miss, but there are some nematodes that people can try, and encourage you to download our publications on how to best use nematodes in the Pacific Northwest. But Heterobdytes Bacteriophora seem to have a pretty good mortality against European chafer, especially those early instar larvae of European chafer. So these would be applications made in August and September when soil temperatures are nice and warm, which the nematodes and the bacteria that nematodes carry that actually kill the insect enjoy. And so you want to time those applications in August, September, maybe even into November, but by then the grubs are getting a little bit large and harder to kill with nematodes. So again, we'll put this information out on HortSense, our PNW insect management handbooks, and extension bulletins throughout the Northwest. But the big bummer is, like, you've already learned about Japanese beetle, and this is just going to add more confusion, because Japanese beetle and European chafers look very similar. Japanese beetle are going to be quite a bit smaller. And so there might be some cues there on size and time of year that you find the grub that you're like, oh, this one might tend to be more like a Japanese beetle and not a European chafer. And I'll describe a little bit of that. But This is a bummer. They look the same, and unfortunately, we have issues with Japanese beetle in the Northwest now, and European chafer infestations are just going to add confusion because the damage looks exactly the same, and vertebrate pests also respond in the same way as they want to eat them. Their life cycle times out about the same time, so this might be a way to do a quick eyeball of like, if you're like, hey, I'm seeing really small grubs in this February, March, April time. Those might be, relatively small, might be Japanese beetle grubs, because by now European chafer grubs are getting pretty beefy. These are the ones that are going to be up to maybe even 3/4 of an inch long, and they're beefy. So if you're seeing really small C-shaped grubs at this time of year, those might be ones that you want to consider sending in a sample for to get it identified, because we can identify the larvae pretty easily, and we'll also share the resources on how to do this, but it works better when the larvae are expired. A good way to kill them is to throw them in vinegar or rubbing alcohol and flip them over on their back and stretch them out a little bit so you can get a good look at the underside of their butt. And if you look at their hairy butts, the way the hairs are placed will help you identify the difference between a European chafer larvae and a Japanese beetle grub. And so, see, in this European chafer, the roster pattern, which is what we call the hairy butt pattern, kind of forms a nice V. The Japanese beetle is a little bit more sparse and not as constricted. So that's one quick way that, especially if you send us grubs or WSDA grubs, they're going to use this characteristic to key those out. So again, if you see something, definitely say something. Report your potential Japanese beetle sightings to WSDA. You can use the Washington Invasive Species Council app to upload your observations and potential reports. But it's really important that you do report suspect Japanese beetle problems. To add insult to injury, we also have possibly another turf grub that we just found a record of here in Washington State in Pierce County out near the golf courses along the coastline, called the masked chafer. So there's even a third grub that might add further confusion to things happening here. And so that's it for grubs, and I want to quickly cover another new emerging pest that's popping up within the Northwest that is going to be an issue for those that work outside and enjoy parks and so forth in the last couple minutes. And that's just to give you a quick heads up that we have a new fire ant in the Pacific Northwest called the European fire ant. It's Myrmica rubra. This fire ant is native to Europe and has a wide distribution going from Ireland all the way through Siberia. It really likes wetland areas, creeks, rivers, streams, coastal lines. It likes that kind of that close aquatic association with water bodies. And it's been in North America for a long time. It first was found in Maine or Massachusetts in the early 1900s, and has slowly spread across the East Coast. It's got it's typical ant, constricted abdomen, elbowed antennae. It does have a needle-like stinger that packs a wallop if you get stung. They're pretty teeny. When you know that you have them, you know you have them because you're getting stung. And that's unfortunately the easiest way to identify them. They form densely packed infestations. So once an infestation starts, you'll have multiple colony locations. And again, they're really looking for that wet situation, damp soils, and so forth. And they'll nest along tree roots, shrubs, along the base of shrubs, under rocks, logs, other kind of rocks and landscape features. We find them along the roots of dandelion plants in turf areas here in Washington State and up in British Columbia. And when they occur, they dominate the ecology of the area. So sometimes it's difficult to find any other ants and just overall arthropods and other types of things kind of disappear because they're so ecologically dominant. And they're great predators. They're very aggressive and can quickly overtake an area. For example, the places that I've found them in Seattle area, that's the only ant I could find. And again, these are highly aggressive. You know, if you bother them or set up a picnic on top of a nest, they're going to cause painful stings, and conflicts with humans are on a rise. Right here in Western Washington, we have confirmed populations around the University of Washington campus, including the Washington Arboretum. That's where it was first found in 2006. They're pretty easy to find in the waterways going out of Lake Union. But we also have confirmations now up north into shoreline area and on top of the lake there. And I suspect these are more widespread than we know. So with that, I'm going to end there and be happy to answer any questions if people have them. But thanks for your time and attention, and don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any more questions about these pests.
Thank you for your presentation. That was some awesome knowledge. There is one question in the chat box. If you know this answer, it says, does the Japanese beetle treatment also control the scrub? And in terms of treatment, they're talking about the pesticide and its use.
That's a great question. And it's hard to answer that because we don't really understand, things could be different here in the Northwest than they are in the East Coast, where they've worked out the impacts of insecticides on the different grub species pretty extensively on the East Coast. We do see that European chafers tend to be more tolerant of some of those products, so they're a little bit harder to kill than Japanese beetle, and so there could be some differential between species. It is likely, though, that like in areas where they've been managing Japanese beetle, they've also been impacting European chafer populations also.
Awesome. Thanks, Todd. Attendees, if you have any other questions, feel free to go ahead and post them in the chat box.
Okay, everybody. This is the final presentation for today's webinar. I would like to say a big thank you to all the presenters today. I can't tell you how happy I am to see that everyone was able to join us. And I really want to say thank you to all the presenters who took the time out of their busy schedules to come and share with us some of the interesting things in their world, especially when we're dealing with invasive species. So the final talk I will actually be giving, and after that we'll be doing one last pesticide credit. And then, of course, after that, we'll be happy to answer your questions if you have any questions regarding any of the presentations from today. Again, thank you everyone for attending. And I will talk about an insect that's not actually here in North America, although we've had a couple of close shaves with it. We're going to be talking about the yellowed spotted stink bug. And why should we in Washington State, and I should also argue in the Pacific Northwest, why should we be concerned about this pest? Well, first off, we probably should talk a little bit about the biology of this insect. Erythrocina folio, this is actually a bug that's of economic concern to Asia, where it's actually found. It's actually native to East Asia. It's been found in China, Japan, Taiwan, India, and Indonesia. This pest will actually feed on multiple host plants, and it goes after a lot of the industries over there in Eastern Asia. There's actually 2 described species of Erythrocina worldwide. And again, one of the interesting characteristics of this stink bug is that actually it's fairly closely related to the brown marmorated stink bug. Many of you here in the Pacific Northwest actually know or have encountered the brown marmorated stink bug. It's a pest of really kind of became famous actually on the East Coast, where it cost growers millions of dollars. People forgot or abandoned their IPMs because of this insect when it came around back in the early 2000s. Since then, BMSB has spread, and that's kind of a concern we have with the yellow spotted stink bug. Could it follow a similar pathway into North America like BMSB? With globalization, it's almost certain that that's the likelihood that it would come through. Again, we've had close encounters, but fortunately, we've been able to prevent it. Like the spotted lanternfly in BMSB, this insect has a piercing sucking effect. What they'll use is their beak, or what's called a rostrum. And they use this rostrum to actually suck on the food. They'll actually regurgitate enzymes to break down the integrity of the tissue that they're sucking on, and they'll actually suck it up as a fluid. Of course, what happens, like the lanternfly, they'll excrete their waste like honeydew. So it's liquid form, and it gets all over everything. It's nasty. It stinks too. I mean, these bugs have, when you crush them, a particular odor that is rather disgusting. Some people have described them to smell similar to that of like a gym socks, cilantro. So these, again, the characteristics that are kind of characteristic of a stink bug in general. I guess that's why they call them stink bugs. But again, this insect, it has over 51 host plants that's been recorded. Tree of Heaven seems to be a continuing theme with this insect pest. Like spotted lanternfly, Tree of Heaven is one of its reproductive hosts, which makes it very concerning for us in Washington State, and I would argue in the Pacific Northwest as a whole, because Tree of Heaven, like we mentioned earlier in the first presentation, there's a lot of areas where Tree of Heaven has been established. And so this is a great opportunity for this stink bug. If it was to ever get a foothold in Washington State, it would be a great way to spread the insect around. Unfortunately, this is one of those, both of these pests are ones we don't want to see in our state. I mentioned that we'll go after specialty crops. It actually prefers apples, cherries, and pears. And actually, it prefers pears over the other hosts, at least according to research done in China. Obviously, I should point out, Washington is a leading producer of fresh market pears. According to the Pacific Northwest Hort Council, pears are valued at $247 million in the Pacific Northwest. So obviously, this insect would do just fine on the hosts that are here. I mentioned earlier that they feed on the actual fruit. And you can see here in this photo, here's an example of a stink bug feeding damage on an apple. Someone was cutting away, showing the browning. That's actually, that browning effect is actually due to the enzymatic enzymes found in the saliva of the stink bug. What they do is probe an area and use that saliva to kind of break down the tissue. That's actually the material that gets kind of spongy, and then they lap it up as a basically applesauce. They're, of course, going to be doing well on peaches. I've got here a photo of some BMSB, or brown marmorated stink bugs, feeding on peaches here in Yakima, Washington. Again, this is something we don't want to test with the yellow spotted stink bug, but it's very likely that if they would come over here, that they would be able to adapt very quickly to our specialty crops. Again, one of the things I will keep repeating in this presentation is that we do not have spotted or yellow spotted stink bug here in North America, but it's not a question of are they coming, but when will they come? I figured it would be important that we look at some of the diagnostic characteristics of this insect. These are the telltale signs that you probably have a yellow spotted stink bug. If you look at the antennae, and an interesting fact about stink bugs, that Pentatomidae, the penta meaning five points, actually it refers to the actual antenna of stink bugs, these true bugs. And so if you look at the fifth segment at the very tip, there's some yellowing coloration. If you look at the actual patronum, there is what do you call it? The petroneum actually has a yellow line streaking all the way from the head towards the end of the petroneum, which is that kind of plate that covers the kind of near the head, the thorax of the actual insect. If you look at, so those are very characteristic features to look for. If you look at the dorsal end, there's also a lot of yellow speckling all over the stink bug. Near the hemielytra, you can see that their wing pads are very dark. Again, characteristics of this particular stink bug. The beak or the rostrum is very pronounced. If you look on the underside, the ventral side of the insect, they have a lot of kind of like a yellowish white coloration. Most of the stink bugs that we have over here don't have such striking features. We do have some stink bugs like the Euschistus conspersus that have like a creamy color on their abdomen, but nothing as striking as the yellow spotted stink bug. So again, fairly large insect. They're about the size of your fingernail, or your thumbnail, I should say, maybe a little bit larger. So again, around 18 to 23 millimeters in size. Their life cycle is actually fairly predictable of many stink bugs. They generally have, this species in general is univoltine. Unlike BMSB, or the brown marmorated stink bug, which can have somewhere between one generation to sometimes a couple of generations, the yellow spotted stink bug has not been tested in North America. So it's rather difficult to say whether or not there would be more generations per season. What we do know is that they produce about 12 eggs per egg mass. Those eggs will then develop into first instars after 5 to 7 days. And in the scientific world, we use the term instar. It's basically a life stage. And so there's actually 5 different nymph life stages within the species. You'll see that as they get older and more mature, wing pads start to develop on their back. You can see here in the 5th instar stage, the actual stink bug has a very pronounced wing pad. Eventually, as they mature into the actual adult stage, they'll actually develop a solid wing, and they're mobile at this point. Stink bugs are fairly good flyers. I wouldn't say they're the best flyers, but they'll be able to move around. They overwinter as adults, so very similar to some of the stink bugs that we have here in Washington State. Looking at the actual opportunities of the stink bug establishing in our state is something that WSU was concerned about a couple of years ago. There was a paper that was published on the potential habitat susceptibility of the yellow spotted stink bug. Interestingly enough, it has spread into Europe, and it's actually been spreading into now several countries in there. It was established over in Brazil, and the government of Brazil has been watching the population down there. So far, North America has not had a population that's taken a foothold on our continent. However, there's been some close calls. In fact, when spotted lanternfly was established back in 2014 in Pennsylvania, the same rock that was, or landscape rock that was brought over, also had a stink bug, a yellow spotted stink bug in it. And my boss Sven was one of the guys who was able to intercept it and send it off to the Smithsonian. So that was actually kind of cool to see interceptions of this pest and preventing it from ever being established, which is also very great. One of the things that was noted about Washington State, actually the West Coast in general, it's very optimal habitat for this insect. The dry climate, the warm weather seems to be something that they would do well in. If you look at the maps here, there's these degree maps, and kind of like a weather map. The suggestion is that honestly, the yellow spotted stink bug would do well in eastern Washington. The red highlights indicate that where it would be able to establish. Habitat susceptibility, all down California. It's not good. The breadbasket of North America seems to be a very, I guess one could call it prime real estate for this stink bug. And there's a lot of ports that are up and down the coast. And especially if you look at King County, there's regions there that could be potential sites for this insect, and get at least a foothold. So again, not in our state, not in North America as of yet, but it's not actually. I always say act with caution, because these insects can sneak in without people being aware of them, and then by the time we do find them, it can be actually rather too late. So again, being able to identify these insects, and having all of you here who are listening to this presentation, being aware of what the stink bug looks like, actually can help us intercept it before it ever becomes a problem. We've got a lot of great tools out there, EDD maps, WISC. I mean, we've got a lot of great opportunities to communicate with everybody. And of course, I know we have a lot of scientists that are actually monitoring those data banks, iNaturalist, great ways to be able to communicate. So again, looking at Washington State, it seemed to be a suited region for this insect, especially if you look at Yakima, Benton County, Franklin County, Walla Walla, all of the specialty crop producing regions, all the way up into the Okanogan area, seem to be very effective for this insect's potential establishment. So again, they go after cherries. Yes, they'll go after cherries. They'll go after apples. Will they go after huge monocrops? That will be interesting to see. We've seen in the past with BMSB that they did very well on the East Coast, but when you come over here to Washington State, we didn't really have as much damage in the monocrops. But if you go over to the west side of the Cascade Mountain Range, that's where I get the most complaints about that stink bug. So I wonder if it would be the similar behavior as BMSB. Hard to say until this insect shows up, and hopefully it never will. But again, that's something that we have to think about. I want to kind of point out that hitchhiking seems to be the most effective way for a lot of these invasive species to spread around. And a lot of the presentations that we heard today were reinforcing this argument that, again, with globalization, you're going to see a lot of exports and imports bringing in unwanted guests. And in this case, there was an example back in December of 2023. The Australian Department of Agriculture, Fish and Forestry, DAF, actually intercepted a freight or a cargo ship coming from Eastern Asia. It sailed all the way down to the port, and DAF was able to intercept obviously hundreds and hundreds of BMSB, but they also found a lot of yellow spotted stink bug. And because of that, the ship was actually put into quarantine, and they had to actually return. This ship was basically bringing shipment of electric cars down to New Zealand. So I guess right now there's a lot of angry people down there, down under, without their electric cars. So it's costs millions to return this cargo, but it would actually save the industry down there billions of dollars. And so that's kind of the same idea we think about when we deal with invasive species. As the pests are coming in, sometimes it's better to quarantine something to prevent it from ever establishing. So again, it's an expensive endeavor, but it saves money and time, and also habitat preservation. We don't want to see this bug in Washington State. And so if anyone's ever taken the time, it's actually worth going down to the docks and seeing just all the shipment, all of the supplies that are moving back and forth. Is actually almost a little overwhelming, to be in fact. All of the cargo shipment cargo has to be inspected for invasive species. So WSDA does a lot of this work where we go in and we'll inspect the actual imports coming in. This is something, again, why it's important that we monitor for insects like the yellow spotted stink bug or snails. If we got snails coming in, we really don't want to see them coming in this way. There's also lots of other ways that insects can come in. You're bringing it in with your passenger luggage. Obviously, we talked about containers, general cargo, machinery, and vehicles, just like we were referred to down in Australia. This is, again, one of those scenarios where, gosh, it would be terrible to get the stink bug in our state. So again, looking for areas to prevent the spread of new invasive species. WSDA does a lot of work with prevention and making sure that we don't ever see insects like the yellow spotted stink bug. With that said, kind of wanted to go over some of the integrated pest management methods that are being conducted over in East Asia. Sampling, visual sampling using basically beet trays. It's basically a little tray that you hold, and you use a stick and you whack the foliage with. This seems to be one of the most effective methods of monitoring. So visual observations, sampling with beet trays. Sticky traps. There's been some research conducted doing sticky traps, clear sticky traps, to see whether or not they can intercept the flybys. That seems to be an effective method for at least sampling. There are some work being conducted on what are called pyramid traps. They look like a huge cone that's placed onto the surface or into the ground, and the stink bugs will land on the actual trap and crawl up towards the top of a collecting jar. Cultural control, sanitation seems to be one of the most effective methods right now, scanning around looking for the insect. There are some parasitoids that are being considered for biological control, namely in the family Eupilmid and Eulopid. Predators seem to be ineffective, but not great. Birds seem to be attacking. There are other insects, spiders are considered to be beneficial. Praying mantis. There are, of course, other predatory stink bugs as well. But overall, biological control seems to be it's out there. The wasps are doing their thing, but it's really coming down to chemical control. So this is, again, one of the reasons why we really don't want to see this pest here. Finding out that we'd have to convert back to broad spectrum pesticides that would disrupt our already fragile IPM programs here in the east side of the Cascades would actually be unfortunate, especially when we have right now tough times in the apple industry. I could say we're going to be seeing a lot more even this year with abandoned orchards, or what we're calling now orchards that need to be reevaluated. That's something we wouldn't want to see getting established in those areas. So again, being proactive and understanding up and coming invasive species are a very effective method. And this is one of the reasons why I thought this would be a great, final presentation, is to show kind of the here's a stink bug. Yeah, we don't have it here in the state, but it's one that we need to kind of keep an eye out for. And of course, what we're doing is, keep reporting. If you see any of the insects or invasive species that we covered today, obviously report it to us. We want to know where they're at. If you see it, take a photo of it. It's always great to take a photo of these insects. We need to know what it is. And sometimes a photo is kind of the deal breaker. Obviously, keep watching where when WSDA sends out our information, our feed. We've got our Facebooks, we've got our Twitter accounts, etc. All of our social media output has great opportunities for you to be informed on invasive species like the yellow spotted stink bug if we ever get it. We do thank you for your time attending these events, and we have just enough time now for questions and answers. At this point, if any of the panel, any of the presenters have any if you have any questions for the other presenters today, we're more than happy to answer them. And this will actually wrap up the yellow spotted stink bug presentation. Again, it's nice to say, hey, we don't have this pest, don't ever want to see it, and we kind of want to keep it that way. So I'm glad to share this information with you guys.
This is now going to be our question and answer time. So please, any questions you have, we'll try to get those answered. But you can always reach us at pest@agr.wa.gov. That's the General Pest Program email, and this is the General Pest Program telephone number, 1-800-443-6684. And then, of course, our website, agr.wa.gov, will have a wealth of information for you on all kinds of topics. And so I'm going to stop sharing so we can move to the question and answer time. And I see, Clay, you have your hand up. I'm going to allow your mic so you can unmute yourself now and ask your question. Clay Durham, go ahead. You have to unmute yourself. You should be able to do that now.
I'm sorry, he stepped away right now.
Okay, his hand is up. If he
I'm
comes
sorry.
back, that's all right. If he comes back, we'll be happy to take his question.
All right, thank you.
Are there any other questions? I mean, while we're here, I think we'll take questions of any subject, whether it's been a subject today or not. If you just have general pest program questions, we can try and field them as well. Mike, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. I was just in the chat because this is not a question, it's a chat. And in that, I was advocating for the use of EDD maps and iNaturalist to help us with some of our IDs. And had mentioned in the chat that Cassie and Josh had a challenge that went out for fall of 2022, 2024. And in that challenge, they received over 6,000 observations. And of those, we went through and identified a fair number, not enough, but a fair number of them. And there were a number of things that popped up as being very common in Washington State. And the top 5 of that list was the brown marmorated stink bug. And so these kind of efforts, I think, will help us in determining not only what is native to our area, but catching and maybe even early detection of what might be in our area that, we just don't have enough eyes to capture. And that is where the public itself can help us, or fieldmen or whomever can help us detect some of these invasive insects before they become established.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. I'm going to call out, I'm not sure who this is directed to, but there's a question. Are you still releasing moths for Seneco? They seem to disappear after a year. I'm not sure if anyone has any information on that, but please feel free to respond if you have an answer on that one. Okay, Eric, if you have more information about that, I'm not familiar with a moth release program. So I don't know how to answer that one. Walter, you have your hand up. Let me just 1 second. I have to allow you to unmute. And then, okay, you should be able to unmute yourself, Walter, to ask your question.
Yeah, so I'm curious. I have 12 credits, and this course is for 6 credits. So will I only get 3, correct?
I can answer that question. So you'll be awarded all 6 credits. You can get as many credits as you want, but only 15 will go for your application or your license if you have a pesticide license.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No, my pleasure. Good question.
Thanks, Walter. And then we had a question in the chat. I'm not sure if Nathan Roueche is still on, but there was a question about whether invasive mussels can be killed in salt water.
That's a question for Justin Bush. I'm with terrestrial mollusks.
Sorry, yeah, my bad. I'm not sure if Justin is still on. I know he was for sure only going to be able to make it for his talk. If he's not, or Jessica is not on that can answer that, then I might suggest just reaching out directly to the Washington Invasive Species Council to get some more information on that. And Sue, I see you have your hand up. You can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, I'm just wondering about brown marmorated stink bug. Early on there was a big push to educate the public about it, and then I guess it just became so established that people just stopped really doing anything about it. I know they said that it was one of the most reported invasives, but are we just not like doing anything about it anymore? Is it just too late to stop it? Is it just being treated like any other pest now, or is there anything going on to try to slow it down? That's my question.
Thanks. Josh, or I don't know if Todd is still on, that can answer that.
Is Sven still on?
I mean, I can answer it, but I was going to let somebody.
Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
Go for
Flip a
it,
coin,
Josh.
Mike. Do you want that? Oh, okay. Yeah. So the answer to that question is right. It hasn't honestly been a pest of economic damage, at least in Washington State. Now, I can't say that for Oregon. That's a different world. But as far as Washington State's concerned, no, it's now considered not a pest of concern. It is an urban pest, meaning it's a nuisance pest, but it's not a pest of economic concern to the ag industry. And so, yeah, there has been a lot of push, and I would say this lines more with extension now than anything. The brown marmorated stink bug has some natural enemies that are very effective, and we have the wasps in our state, and they have been spreading slowly but surely. But as far as the state is concerned, no, we're not really doing anything with that stink bug at the current time.
And that's a good
Mike.
question, because it does sort of point out the fact that there is limited resources. And in Jessica LaBelle's talk, she mentioned that there are limited resources, but a number of organisms that are worthy of attention. And so that's probably why there's a national as well as state lists of invasive insects. And it's more or less a priority of a funding priority for some of these agencies.
And I'm just going to tack on a little bit to that. So WSDA, usually our involvement is before a pest becomes established, and brown marmorated stink bug is very much established in Washington State. And so then it usually goes to a management side, and that's where WSU Extension basically takes over. That's kind of like the general process. Josh, there were some questions about Tree of Heaven. I'm not sure if they got answered in the Q&A, but there's also one in the chat asking if there is Tree of Heaven control coming to Walla Walla for along the railway areas and ports of entry specifically, but there were also more general questions about people wanting more information about the Tree of Heaven control.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So again, we are teaming up with county noxious weed boards, and we've been handing funding over to them to map out Tree of Heaven, but also as well as do their best to remove it. I know Sue Bird with the Yakima County has been doing wonders. So a great shout out to the Yakima County Pest Board. But this is again a I guess a multi-year project that we've been doing. So yeah, we have sent some funding to the District of Walla Walla to remove Tree of Heaven. As far as railroads, typically the actual weed boards have their connections to with and will work with the rail yards to get Tree of Heaven removed or treated. So again, I don't currently have direct contact with rail yards per se. I'm working in the process of getting that because I'd like to collaborate with rail yards, educate their technicians to actually look for spotted lanternfly. But as far as removal, we've been pushing forward funding to remove trees. And again, it's really coming down to right now, it's the weed boards that are doing the work. So shout out to all of the weed boards that are involved in this project. All 8 of them, to be precise. Hope that answered your question.
Thanks. And Clay, your hand is still up. I don't know if you're back at your desk, but feel free if you wanted to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Sorry, he had to go back out to the orchard, but he did want me to just say that you guys put on the best presentation that he's listened to for a long time. So thank you very much.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. Appreciate the kind words. So Eric put some follow-up question in the chat. He said he thought someone was releasing caterpillars that eat the weed Seneca vulgaris, the common groundsel, but maybe that was Oregon. He saw the caterpillars for a few years and occasionally adults, but then they disappeared. The moth is, I can't pronounce something, Tyria jacobae. Sorry, just butchered that. Just curious if there's any releases here. I'm not familiar with that. I don't know if anybody else might be.
So if I'm right, he's talking about the spotted lantern look-alike, isn't he, Josh? Isn't that the what do they call it? The moth that has actually been released, and I've gotten pictures of it while I'm on the west side of the state.
That's actually true. But I honestly don't know the status. I don't think WSDA is involved in any releases. If I were to guess, it's got to be extension.
Well, there it is. Sven's got it. Cinnabar moth.
Yeah, that's the only one that I'm familiar with. I know I saw it in my backyard last year. So that one's still around. So one thing I was going to show, we brought up iNaturalist a few times, and I thought I just might share, since we have a little bit of time here yet before 4 o'clock, if I can pull up the right screen, one moment. Oh, here it is. If you're not familiar with iNaturalist, it's a really great tool. It's free. There's 2 different ways you can use it. There's an app you can get on either Android or an iPhone. And then there's just the online version if you don't want to download an app. But it's very easy to just the accounts are free. You take photos. If you have the GPS on your phone, it'll even like grab that location information and automatically add it. But I just pulled up like my account for something, like I saw some bees out in my yard. Bees are my thing lately. So I take lots of photos of bees. But very helpful for any kind of identification of different organisms. And the nice thing is that when you upload these to iNaturalist, it's a crowdsourced identification tool, really. And so people who know something about bees, for example, will go look at bees and help identify them, so you can figure out what you have. But it's also contributing to science. And there's a lot of ways that this information is being used throughout the world. Really, this is a worldwide platform, and it's super easy. I mean, just to click, if you're doing the online version, you just click this upload button here to add your photos and then fill in the information. And the same thing, if you have the app on your phone, there's just a little button that's like, new observation, and you upload the photos. The one thing I would suggest is that if you are trying to take photos of something, as I think has been mentioned today, the more photos, the better, and the different angles you can get so people can see some of those key characteristics they might be needing to identify something. And then also just getting as close as you can to the subject, which is a lot easier with plants than it is with insects that tend to hop or fly away. But it's a really great tool that a lot of, we use it here at WSDA, but a lot of agencies are starting to use that. We actually have people that are just sort of monitoring, periodically if spotted lanternfly is showing up, for example. And there's been occasions where we've notified other states like, hey, did you know there's this record and it looks legit for spotted lanternfly in your state? So it's a super useful tool, and it's free. So just want to do a little plug there for iNaturalist. And I don't think I'm seeing any more questions. Give it another couple of seconds. But otherwise, just want to thank everyone one more time for attending today. This, as you know, has been recorded, and we'll be sending out the recording later. There were a lot of people that registered and then weren't able to attend, and also we're hoping that this would be recorded. So you only get the pesticide credits for being here live, but the recording will be available so you can go back and watch it at another time. Hopefully by tomorrow or early next week, we'll have the recording available. Okay, so one more question did come in. Is there any way to help prevent European fire ants from invading? And I think that Todd dropped off. I don't know if anyone has more information. I did watch an invasive ants webinar, and I don't recall seeing much to prevent them, but not sure if anyone who's still on the line has a good answer for that. Cassandra, I might encourage you to reach out to Todd Murray, who I think had to drop off the call for some more information about that. All right. I'm not seeing any more questions in the Q&A or the chat. So, let's see. Great. No, that was just a smiley face. So I think we are done. Thank you so much for coming today. And we look forward to reviewing your feedback. And as always, just reach out to us if you have any questions.
And I'd just like to chime in one last time and say special kudos to Carla and Cassie for all the behind the works that you guys do to make these webinars possible. So thank you so much for you guys. Really appreciate you.
You are welcome. Nick, I saw your questions about for any weeds or pests listed. Is there anywhere to find pesticide use? I think you mean pesticide use recommendations. I think that would be, is that in HortSense or WSU publications? I know would have that.
HortSense is a great one to go to. You could also go to, if you're looking for herbicide advice, the state has a really great website as well. So we've got our, and then the county, weed, county weed pest boards also have some really great information. So contact your local county board as well.
There is also the Pacific Northwest Management Handbook specifically for weeds, and it's very good for professionals and licensed applicators. Not so good for homeowners.